One common onboarding mistake that a lot of apps still make.
I think a lot of us try to get you in as quickly as possible. We don't ask you as many preferences, which might help tailor your experience. And then that becomes a big pain point for us to later solve. India is a very internet savvy country today. So anything that you do in terms of the app infrastructure or app ecosystem, it touches the lives of a lot many more people than web ever did. As product managers, we are sort of sitting in an ivory tower where we are creating products based on what we think the user might be doing. When in reality, users are doing it completely differently. Today, AI is everywhere. We know AI exists. It's just that everyone's still very much struggling with understanding what to do with it. But where does its limitation come in? Its limitation comes in with whatever is not repetitive. The moment you have to create something. So if you don't have an evidence of something, or something doesn't exist, you can't create something afresh.
Welcome to another episode of CRO Wizards Season 2 by VWO Podcast. With hours of in-depth conversations, we talk about using CRO to deliver what your users want, while also driving long-term growth for your business. Before we speak to our guest, here's a very quick overview of what we do. VWO is a leading experience optimization platform that enables you to gather in-depth user insights and build winning experiences across your website and mobile app. VWO Copilot, our AI champion, handles the heavy lifting of suggesting test ideas, creating variations, and finding insights, so you can focus on making strategic decisions that drive growth. Now, without further delay, let's jump right back to this conversation.
Today, we have Rajat Gupta joining us. Rajat is a senior group product manager at Paytm, a leading fintech app in India. He leads a team of PMs at Paytm to create optimized user experiences and scalable product strategies. Previously, he worked with PhonePe, another leading fintech app in India. With over 9 years of experience in product management, Rajat is a seasoned fintech professional and we can't wait to learn from his expertise. Hey Rajat, how are you doing, man? Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. Wonderful day. Looking forward to talking more to you.
Great, Rajat. So, I was wondering what were your initial thoughts when you received the invitation to be on such a podcast? I don't think there are many podcasts out there like this. Do you think such podcasts should exist?
Absolutely. Because a key problem that most people face when we are working in the industry is that we are caught up in our own little silos. We understand what our organizations are doing, but we don't really have a visibility of what the general best practices are. So for people to be able to get to know what others are doing it's a great way of validation. It's a great way of understanding, okay, maybe these are things that I can improve. Maybe this is what I'm doing well. It's an industry accepted practice. Otherwise, it's just what you get to understand as a consumer of the competitive product. So, everyone learns from everyone, makes a better industry overall.
Exactly, that's the point. That's good to hear. Just tell me, like, it's been 9 years in product management. If you had to tell me the top things you love about managing mobile apps, what would they be?
I think in terms of understanding about mobile apps and what you tend to love, what gravitates you in the long run, what keeps you working, is that everything that you do has a very real world impact, especially when it comes to mobile apps, because how India is uh, a very internet savvy country today. Ever since in the last decade, essentially, we've become an internet economy. Everything is there online, and uh, for a lot of people in the country, the first introduction was through mobile internet. So anything that you do in terms of the app infrastructure or app ecosystem, it touches the lives of a lot many more people than web ever did, at least in the Indian context. So, the thing that really drives me, or I think would drive a lot of people, is that whatever you do, like you change the color of a CTA box or you move it around on the screen just the slightest bit. And there are a lot of people who will get affected by it. Because again, English is not something that is such a commonly accepted language even today. And there are multiples of, tens and 20s, 40s of regional languages in India. And
Yeah.
while apps are still being used in English, so your app language detection is not a very good metric for gauging that, but a lot of people are actually still working on visual cues. So if
Yeah.
you were to move your icons around, a lot of people will get confused about where did that icon go, which I was using for my daily needs. So, these are the kind of nuances that come into play, and that makes the problem a lot more interesting, a lot more challenging. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
that's the great thing
I
about app working.
totally agree there. So as you were mentioning about app icons and new features, so Rajat, how do you go about um, a new feature from ideation to release and making it live for all users in a company like Paytm? What does the process look like?
Okay, so the process, it's fairly tedious, if I may put it that way. And it's like coming to the app development process, like we approach it at Paytm, we approach it from a very startup first sort of mindset. Even today, we are a publicly listed company, but in our DNA we are still a startup, so we still expect the same amount of speed from our development teams, from our product teams, from everyone. We are not okay dragging our feet, but at the same time, with this scale, uh, are we able to do that speed? No. Should we be able to do that speed? Again, no. Why? Because uh, as a startup, when you're just, when you're scaling up, uh, what you are very quick to iterate, and you should be, as you should be, because you need to turn things around very, very quickly. Uh, but at the same time, once you have scaled up, if you keep changing things that frequently, or if you keep changing or experimenting things that much more, like we were just discussing about, people working on visual cues, there are a lot of your customers who are going to get affected. And it's not a small number. It's not tens of thousands of people. It's tens of millions of people. There's
Yeah.
there's a huge scale difference. So you have to be very cautious about what you are doing, because, as I said, everything you do touches real world, real people, and at a very large scale. So yes, while we still strive for that speed, which helps us be fast in our market, relatively fast. It's like shooting for the moon, landing in the stars, uh, as the saying goes. So you still try for a harder speed, and you are relatively faster than the market, but at the same time, you tend to take your own pace and be patient with it, be more thorough
Yeah.
with it. So, how that affects the entire process is that we would start gathering our requirements at various levels. We would gather requirements from customer interactions, or we would try to gather requirements based on what the competitor landscape looks like, or just general spitballing of ideas that, oh, hey, what if we tried something like this? So, this is where the ideas would start germinating, if I may. And
Yeah.
once those ideas have germinated, then you would try and flesh it out a little more. That, okay, this is what I'm envisioning my product would do, or this is how I think users will interact, or this is the kind of pain point that this feature or this product will solve for. And this is how I envision that it might actually end up doing. So you start creating your wireframes and everything of that sort. You create your PRDs, your initial PRDs. Of course, a PRD is a living document which keeps changing as you go along, keep developing things. But that is
Us.
the base point where you start off. Once you do that, that's when you start engaging your design teams after having discussed within your internal stakeholders that, okay, this makes sort of sense. Okay, this strategically aligns with what you're trying to achieve at a larger level. Uh, and then you engage your design teams. You would come up with more, high fidelity designs per se. And once those are in place, you start engaging your development team that, okay, this is how I envision it should work. This is what it will look like. Do you have any questions about it? Then you start talking about where the data is going to come from. You start doing that back end working. Till now, you haven't actually started developing. You are still in discussion phase, ideation phase, fleshing out the idea. And this entire process can take anywhere between 1 week to 4 weeks, depending on how quick you are about it, or even more, depending on the size of the feature. But yeah, 1 to 4 weeks is the usual time. That's when you start the development process, which would take one sprint or two sprints, depending on the kind of feature that is, or how you phased it out in terms of what is an MVP, what are the features that you're okay getting, what you are okay letting off in the first go, what are the base points that you want to experiment with so that you can iterate and build more as you proof test this entire feature. And so 1 to 2 sprints, which is essentially 2 to 4 weeks. And once that development is done, you would start testing it out. You would have to do a lot of UAT, you would have to do a lot of QA, and Once all of those are done, that's when you go into the product feature launch cycle, which is another ball game altogether of releasing the app, which I'm not going to spend much time over here. But yeah, that process alone takes about 1 month's time because you have to engage with various kinds of Play Stores or App Store compliances and their release cycles and rollout cycles and whatnot. So yeah,
Yeah.
it takes anywhere between 1.5 to 3 months, depending on the size of feature and the complexity of it.
I'm sure like the first phase of thinking out something that what needs to be built, it takes a lot of time and a lot of questioning from the team members. And as
Absolutely.
we were talking earlier, also you mentioned something like encouraging questioning among your team members. So like if I pick it up from there, can you elaborate on how this approach helps your team? While coming up with new ideas.
Sure. Piyush, the way I look at it, there are three aspects to raising questions. Because especially coming from a society like ours, the Indian society, where it's culturally very ingrained that respect your elders, don't question somebody who's senior to you. We are innately, we are brought up in a manner where it's not good to question. But if you think about it from the scientific point of view, the very scientific principle, the very basic principles of science are be skeptical, question everything. Regardless of who the information is coming from, you should question it. You should try and test it out for yourself. Try and understand why what is the way it is. So there are three aspects that I think tend to get affected when you encourage questioning. There is the culture of skepticism that you create, where it's. I think it's a very positive thing to do if you are a skeptical person. Um, because then you try and understand the world's fundamentals of how things are working. The second aspect is the culture of collaboration, because unless you are engaged, unless you are actually talking about the problem statement at hand, it will not create a democratic environment where everybody is coming up with ideas, where everybody's feeling a sense of ownership for it. Like if I were to just give you a thing to say, hey, Piyush, you know what? This is the feature, this is how I've thought about it, execute it. It would be like my vision that you are having to execute. Whereas if you and I were sitting together and saying, hey, we need to solve this problem. How do you think you should approach it? You Even if I contribute only like a minor point in it, and it's mostly your vision, I will still feel a sense of ownership because hey, I have also contributed to it. Whatever is being taken forward is in agreement with what I also want. So I'm automatically aligned towards the longer goal or the larger goal over here. And
Yeah.
finally, coming back to the cultural aspect, it's about net practice. Because within my team, I have created a sort of safe environment for my team members that, hey, you know what? Feel free to question me. I may be your manager or whatever, but question me. Because you need to practice questioning somebody who's senior to you. So that when you are talking to other teams or you're talking to other organizations, you are not afraid of raising those questions. You should not, because the moment you start fearing raising a question, and this I've learned from a very hard way, by the way, I've been burnt on multiple levels where I was not tactful enough or respectful enough. So, I ended up rubbing the wrong people the wrong way. Uh, but it's very important to be able to question, albeit in a respectful and a tactful way, but you need to. So that net practice has to come in, wherein they
Yeah.
practice out. In fact, I end up polishing some of their questions and okay, this is what you asked, very good question, but perhaps you should phrase it this way. So, I mean, that is the kind of guidance I received by some really, really good mentors and managers I had in the past. So I try to imbibe that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, questioning is one thing, but backing it up with data is also something that whenever a question is being asked to you,
Mhm.
you the next question from you would be, do you have any data to back it up or something like that?
Mhm.
So, according to you, like, what are the most effective methods to identify, let's say, user pain points, or maybe what sort of research tools do you consider essential, before even framing such questions?
Mhm. So okay. To delineate the two things, I don't discourage questions even without data. It could be a conceptual question. Why do we think this way? Do we think users will behave this way? The answers would then come from data, or even the question could be based on a data. Right? It's perfectly fine either way. So now data it's not just about hard number data or analytical data only. A lot of times the insights can be drawn from other channels as well. So broadly, there are 3 or 4 channels which I tend to value a lot, and of course there are n number more channels, but these are the 3 4 that I tend to value a lot. My top channel, and it's the most subjective channel, unfortunately, is talking to customers. So and this goes back to my time at Samsung as well. When I was in the sales strategy team, I wasn't into product management per se. I would visit stores, and this I do even today when I'm out in the market doing little grocery shopping or whatever. I would intently stand next to the person who's paying next to me in the line. I would observe how they are paying, how they are using the app. Now, this is the advantage of working in a scaled app, which a lot of people are using, so that you tend to see people using your product, and you see them
Customer
getting,
insight.
yeah, it's instant validation, it's instant feedback, and you've changed something in the layout, and suddenly you see people struggling with it, and you're like, oh shit, this we shouldn't have done.
That
Similarly, I would not tell them that I work for Paytm or I work for PhonePe or whatever. I would just, yeah, why do you do this? Like, why don't you use the other app? What is the advantage of you? I would even ask merchants, like, why are you using this sound box? Why did you turn down the volume of it? Get to understand how they are using the product. Because the problem is that as product managers or as corporate employees per se, we are sort of sitting in an ivory tower where we are creating products based on what we think the user might be doing. When in reality, users are doing it completely differently. So it's very important to get there to the very ground level. And what you
yeah,
have to be careful with in this case is don't ask them what features they want, because they will tell you the most wildest things and you will not be able to bring them into actionable insights. Just try and observe, and if possible, observe from afar like a creep. What are they doing? How are they doing it without engaging them? Don't, it's like observing deers in the wild. If you disturb them the slightest, they will change their behavior. Try and observe them from afar. See very silently, engage, ask questions like you don't know anything about it. Let them teach you. That is when you will get to understand how they are looking at the product without any intervention from your end. So that I think is the most valuable channel for any kind of customer feedback, and it's very underrated. Very honestly, not a lot of people do it. People rely on more traditional channels like, oh, I'll gather data, I will see how people are doing. That's amazing. I mean, that's a very solid way of doing things,
yeah,
but it doesn't, like sitting behind a screen and observing plain data will give you an understanding of heat maps or where people are interacting or how they're interacting, but it'll never give
yeah,
you an insight on why they're doing it the way they're doing it,
yeah.
right? So it
Because
is important.
customers say something and they do something else,
Exactly.
then
So unless you
yeah,
understand their rationale of why they're doing what they're doing, you will never be able to get to the core of the problem, which is why I said this is a very underrated and very a non-traditional sort of channel, but it's a very effective channel. The
yeah,
second thing I think is actually analyzing your data and your customer feedback that you get from your app, like your CST channels, which are able to provide you that kind of insight, or things like Play Store or App Store feedback. These are subjective, but there are ways of doing meta analysis on them, trying to accumulate things that okay, these are the kind of topics that people are talking about. These are UI related issues. These are payment related issues, and then you can, if you analyze a large enough set, you will be able to draw problems about, this is the largest set of problems. This is the highest share of problem within the payment space. So perhaps this is a big enough problem for me to solve for customer pain points. So this is what is plaguing the customers in terms of issues. So this is an area that we should look at.
mm,
But again, this is a very distinct sort of way of gathering information, and it's
mhm,
very reactive, because if you have gotten that much feedback, then possibly a lot of people are already affected by it. So it's not very proactive channel. Hence, I don't think this is a very effective way of going about it, but it's a necessary way of going about it. You definitely have to. You can't ignore this channel.
yeah,
And finally, I think the customer interviews in a sort of professional environment where you can do blind testing, or you can do group discussions or those kinds of channels that a lot of marketing tools apply in terms of understanding customer feedback, focus group discussions, etc. Those are very handy as well. And I think it's a very effective tool, but at the same time, I think it's more effective when you're looking at a larger strategy about, okay, perhaps this is a new direction we should explore, or this is the general problem of why people switch from app A to app B. So if you're like trying to make a market share strategy, perhaps that is where this kind of a tool comes in more handy to have a general direction. And of course, finally, any kind of data that you can observe, that's amazing. That's a very immediate sort of thing that you can action on without any delay, because the rest of these channels are fairly slow. So yeah, these four channels, I would say.
Great, great. So I think there's a lot of learning for how you can go about your user research. But I'm sure at Paytm you must be doing a lot of experiments that is moving your success matrix in some
Yeah.
way. Uh, so would you like to share some of those, some tests, some experiments that were successful or offered you valuable learnings at your job?
So not very long ago, I think, and I say that very liberally, not too long ago. It was almost 2.5 years ago when I was fairly new in Paytm. We were managing the. I mean, I'm still managing the homepage. I was still an IC at that point in time. So I was charged with this task of understanding what is a new widget that you can create. So, widget for context is any kind of UI element that you see, like a set of icons with a box around it or some title on it. That entire container would be called a widget. So, as a platform team, we tend to develop several such widgets, which then other teams or other platforms who are using our platform can utilize. So it's like preset Lego brick sets of sorts that you can employ directly. So those combinations have to be thought out about what is an effective mix of those combinations. What is it that engages the user well enough? So that was a problem statement I was trying to solve. And we were trying to experiment with various things like, okay, we need to deliver a lot more message here. The space that we have is not sufficient. This is the kind of offer we want to communicate, or this is the kind of thing that we want them to do. So, how do you give a big enough call out? So, we started experimenting with things like, okay, we are traditionally an icon sort of app. We started using some banners instead to communicate. Okay, these are two icon photos. Underneath it, we'll put a banner, and we'll try and communicate the larger message there. Then we found that, okay, the banners are not so much being engaged with. So, okay, then we changed the experiment a little bit. What if I was to replace the icons and put big squarish sort of elements and communicate that, but also make it look like the same thing that people are used to, because there may be some sort of habit that, okay, I'm used to looking at a certain line icon, which gives me the identification that this is the category I want to go for. Again, the engagement was not as high. It was very promising initially. The trend did not sustain. So there was definitely a curiosity which we had built, but that curiosity was not sustaining when you experimented for a long enough timeline. So, okay, then what we realized over multiple such iterations or experimentation is that the moment you start bringing a banner in, any kind of artwork, people tend to not engage with it as much. Why could that be? So we tried to find that out. We spoke to people within our vicinity. We were, okay, hey, just give me a quick feedback on this. That's again very effective tool of getting some feedback. That show it to your wife, show it to your spouse, whoever, show it to your parents. People who are not so tech adept, try and find those out from your friends. And of course, we all have friends who are not so tech adept, who are late adopters. Try and show it to them. Those people will actually bring out the pain points. The tech adept person will be very quick to adapt it and like, oh, this is I'm used to it. Okay, fine, great. But so show it to those kind of people for a very quick feedback. And what I came to understand is people tend to view any kind of banner as an advertising. So what happens is that they mentally gloss over it. The moment you see that, you will gloss through it and you're like, oh, I don't need to look, whatever that is. And you will look for your icon specifically, because icons people associate with things that are worth their effort, or something that will actually help them. So any kind of job related thing or anything that actually does the service is going to be icon. Anything banner is advertisement. I don't want to waste time on advertisement, so I will focus on icon. But the problem still stood that we needed to still communicate a little more things because the offers are also pertinent to the people, except our current channel was not effective about it. So what we decided was that, okay, let's create a modular tool wherein we can have icons as well as banners in the same vertical space, because you can't just add things underneath in a super app sort of
Yeah.
structure. One of the biggest problem statements that again we tend to fight for is vertical space. The more
Yeah.
vertical space you occupy, further the categories underneath it are going to be affected because people will not scroll down further enough. So optimizing the
Absolutely.
length of the page is perhaps one of the biggest problem statements. So what
Yeah.
we realized that, okay, if we put it in a carousel of sorts, that we start with icons, so your traditional icons still remain, but at the same time you get a peek of what could be a great offer. So we haven't taken away something that you recognize, but at the same time given you a peek into what more you can do. So we
Mhm.
created widgets of that sort, that we'd have a big square banner, you'd see half of it so that you have curiosity, then you'd start scrolling that carousel and explore the entirety of it. Or we put smaller banners, or we put
Mhm.
a different combination of icons, like 4 icons or 2 icons only. And then what if we put a video window within this, like a quick
Yeah.
small trailer sort of thing playing, if it's a movie promotion, a small
Yeah.
trailer playing there, or GIFs, things like those, anything to make it
Mhm.
engaging. This
Yeah.
became a huge hit. Like initial, and in this case, the experimentation results were such that initially there was slow traction, but it started picking up slowly and steadily. What we realized is that eventually people are adapting to it. So the adoption cycle was such, and
Mhm.
eventually it became such a huge hit that more and more growth teams started asking for it. The other teams who hadn't used it so far and we were experimenting with it, they started asking, hey, I want to use that widget on my page because I think that
Yeah.
is doing a great job. Because when they started observing it within the ad, like, oh, value proposition also going in, icons also remaining, win-win on both sides. And so that's essentially the cycle of experimentation, that you iterate on things, you try and do things which might seem like an arrow in the dark, but
Yeah.
at a small enough scale.
Yeah.
If you do it at a very large scale, then you affect people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very interesting experiment actually. To know it as a user also, it feels like, okay, this was the whole story behind this feature. No. But anyway, so yeah, when we talk about apps like Paytm or PhonePe you work with, there must be certain kind of operations which are, most impactful that affects many users and, the bottom line metrics. Maybe that Pareto principle comes into play where
Mhm.
what is that 20% that moves 80% of the needle of growth for such apps? Could you like tell me some of those use cases you have in mind?
So, in a scaled app, and I will limit my answer to scaled apps only because I have experience of working in PhonePe and Paytm, both of which are at at very high level of user numbers. So I will not
Yeah.
venture that I am an expert on things which are just starting up. I'm not, but
Uh,
in any scaled app, oftentimes what's most impactful for users and for your market share, it's usually not the most important from your bottom line's perspective. So how we tend to think of it is, and I think that's how most platforms which are scaling up to a large enough size today are doing, is that you have to build things at the cost of growth. I mean, at the cost of uh, actual financial or monetary value. You have to grow
yeah.
your user base to a large enough number, and once you have that number, that's when you start doing ancillary activities, which actually actually give you the bottom line gains. And we've seen this play out with all kinds of social media platforms, whether be it a Facebook or an Instagram or a Snapchat, all of these things, they start giving you free services. And that's for a reason, that because we want to actually gain user trust. We want to gain user activity on our platform, large enough traction. And then on top of it, you start doing ancillary activities. One of the simplest things to do is advertising. There's very little incremental cost to it, but at the same time, you tend to gain a lot. And then in the world of the fintech apps, it could be things that you do, things like your travel booking or your insurance purchases or your loan disbursements. These are things which are good for you, which are essential for you, which you might be wanting to do anyway, and we are helping you get there. Because a large problem in a lot of the okay, I might be digressing here, so please feel free to cut this out. But, uh, a large problem, for example, in the educated sector today is people who are just starting out. They have good salaries, they have good, consistent salaries, but at the same time, if they haven't done activities which help build their credit score, they may not
Mhm.
be eligible for getting loans. So, case in point, this actually happened with my own wife. The way back in 2018, 2019, she had been working for about 5, 6 years now, and she had a great amount of salary at that point in time, but she had never actually gotten herself a credit card or had never bought anything on small EMIs or anything which basically required her to have a loan, even an education loan or anything of that sort. And she had been working
Mm.
with great brand names, by the way, marquee brand names in the tech world. Uh, Yet, when she went to apply for a credit card, she got rejected by 3 or 4 major banks. And for the life of us, we couldn't understand why. And then one nice fellow from Amex, whom I had given a lot of business to, he sat me down and explained to me that, okay, she doesn't have a credit history because she hasn't done any such thing. So that's when you understand that, okay, building that credit score is not always linked to having a good salary or be eligible for a loan. So now the long story that I just narrated is because this is where fintech apps come in. If you were to apply for getting a personal loan from some bank where you do not have these traditional credit scores built up, they will just refer whatever credit score you get from any CRISIL or anything of that sort. But these channels will not have these traditional markers because you haven't engaged with them, even though you are
True.
eligible for it. So you will end up not getting a loan despite being very likely of getting a loan as being a very good possible customer. On the other hand, if you have been engaging with a fintech app, we know the kind of spends that you do. We know the kind of category. We might not be able to individually pin it because, of course, data security and all. So we won't be able to say that, hey, Piyush has done this transaction. No, we'd be able to say that this cohort of users whom we don't know about are generally doing this kind of activity. So this cohort of people would be eligible for a loan because they have X amount of salary which comes into their account every month. And this we are gauging based on what kind of spends they're doing through our platform. That is the visibility we have. So then we build up markers and we say, okay, this is a person who might be needing some kind of credit, and that's how you you start building the kind of customer base and giving services to people who might not be otherwise eligible for it.
Right. Right.
So that
So I think
this comes in.
so just to add to that point, like
Mm,
as this particular innovation by Paytm is changing the user behavior, right?
mm,
Uh, in a way, the credit was not possible in a traditional setting, but
mhm,
now it is because the data is there. The apps are looking
mhm,
into it, and they are offering such services. So what do you think, like I mean, looking at a larger picture, how are apps like Paytm or PhonePe are changing that behavior in users? Because I see a great change in myself. I don't keep a wallet anymore, I mean, when I go out.
Agreed.
So I think that's a great change that these particular apps are responsible for that. So what do you think about this, like how fintech has evolved, and what sort of user behavior it has changed over a.
So I think credit where credit is due. Going back to 2016, the current government, they did one really good job in that they created an internet economy, be it by heavily debated tools like demonetization or the Jandan Yojana, wherein everyone's accounts were created. These were
Mhm.
things which were very fundamental to bringing about an internet economy. And I am
Yep.
speaking in retrospect. I might have complained about it at the point of time because the issues that came with it, perhaps it could have been improved. That's debatable. But anyway, the point is that these were fundamental to bringing about an internet economy, specifically with respect to payments, because a UPI system could not exist if people did not have bank accounts. A UPI system could not exist if people did not have accessible internet at an accessible price. I mean, in 2016, I distinctly remember paying every month 250 rupees for 1 GB of data. And today, you don't know the amount of data that you have in your pack if you are paying 250 rupees or 400 rupees a month for your phone connection. You don't bother about it. And the scenario is very different when you go to any other country where people are still very concerned about, oh, what's your Wi-Fi network? I don't want to be using my data pack. And I can say that for a fact because I used to do that same thing when I was living in Barcelona or when I go to Dubai or something like that. Data is extremely expensive. The fact that we got data for that accessible a price, everyone had bank accounts, and then on top of it, we were forced not to use our cash, which was our primary method of payment, our most favorite method of payment, most trusted method of payment traditionally. When we were forced not to do it, that's when the advent of internet economy came about. And of course, COVID was another thing, unfortunate, but it helped further advent of the internet economy with respect to the adoption of this, where people were forced not to go to traditional shops themselves physically, and they had to rely on platforms doing the work for them, and ended up creating that kind of environment. So now, where does Paytm or the likes of PhonePe or any other major fintech app in India play a part? It's that once this kind of a setup started coming in, people started exploring, okay, what else can we get people to do? Case in point, I remember some years ago, we came up with this category called subscriptions. And this was the middle of COVID. We realized that, okay, people are subscribing more and more to OTT players. People are coming to our platform. How do we marry the two things? So we started selling subscriptions to people, things like Disney Plus Hotstar or Z5 and things like those. And I know this because I was the one who created that category at the behest of some of my seniors at that point in time. But I was the one leading it. I did not fully believe in it because, and that actually ended up also not picking up that greatly because so you try various things because you think there may be potential here for transformation. Some things work out, some things don't. The subscription category did not work out because it was not a traditional channel for people to come and explore subscriptions. I would rather do it on something like a Fire Stick or, some OTT platform giving me an additional add-on, like an Amazon Prime giving me a Lionsgate Play subscription alongside my own subscription. That's an easier way for user discovery with respect to, things like OTT. But there are other categories which worked out. There are things like, rent payment through credit card, because any working professional would want to get that additional, if you're paying something like a 30 to 40,000 rupee rent every month, why would you not want that leeway for the next month? I mean, delay the payment. You are getting that much more interest in your account, and the processing fee that you're paying on your credit card is, it's not in comparison to the kind of reward points that you're going to get. So this was a major change in how people tend to pay. I remember having moved from paying a simple UPI payment to my landlord in Bangalore to shifting to credit card payments to their account directly, because that also helps me create a track that, I have made a payment and I have a receipt for it. So there is no deniability or questionability in that. Similarly, the fact that people don't anymore go to the electricity board offices or the local telephone network operator shops to pay their bills. Instead, it's very simple to now pay it through your phone. So it all comes down to what you have at hand and what you could imagine could be done. And I think a more recent sort of application today that you can see is the advent of AI. Today, AI is everywhere. We know AI exists. It's just that everyone's still very much struggling with understanding what to do with it. Okay, we know it can, when you do a basic sketch, it'll do a generative AI thing. It'll do very complex imagery based on that very basic input. Or you ask it any question and we'll give you a great answer, a very detailed answer. But the applications of it are still being experimented. And I think that's where the fintech apps are also playing a role in terms of the internet economy, in that it's a consistent discovery process. What more can you do? what more can you do to ease the pain points? So finding out those pain points and trying to solve it with what you have or what you can make.
Right, right. So, as you mentioned AI here, so in your workflow currently, what is the use of AI as a mobile app product manager? So there must be a lot of product managers out there who are looking into their workflows. And is it just the writing part? I mean, different wireframes or PRTs you're writing, or there is more to that?
Yeah, I mean, see, there's a lot of things that you can optimize with AI, and there's a lot of things which are still to be understood. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, as I was mentioning, the applications are still not completely understood with respect to AI. And that's my understanding of having read a fair amount about it, or seeing things around me. I think one of the best applications today that I've seen of AI that personally I benefit from is Airtel giving me that warning of this is a spam call when I get a phone call on my number. I think that's one of the best applications of AI. But yeah, jokes aside, uh, I think where AI can come in really handy is you need to understand what is it that you can automate from your workflow. And this was a
Mm.
problem statement that we've traditionally tried to solve for. Be it only the tools of solving this have changed. Case in point, if you looked at a traditional hierarchical structure of any organization, the job of any senior person was to be able to break down a problem statement to the level where a person or a resource which is less expensive for the organization can do it and easily solve it, so that the more expensive resource does not spend their work hours doing that repetitive work, and you
Yeah.
optimize the cost of the company for doing the same kind of operation. And on top of it, then you also try and do away with human resources altogether, where you try and build dashboards for regular reporting. Like, why should my analyst spend the same amount of 2 hours or 3 hours every day building the same report? Why can't I optimize it? Why can't I automate it? So that my analyst doesn't have to do this repetitive work, because it has to be engaging for them as well. Why should it be only grunt work for anyone, right? That's the larger goal that we've all been trying to follow. The
Yeah.
advent of AI changes the way you solve it. So, case in point, if I required a human analyst to repetitively do some analysis in order to be able to draw that insight, the amount of time that my analyst was spending on a problem statement earlier will go down drastically, because that
Yeah.
computing power did not exist. AI, as far as I understand it, it's primarily giving you insane amounts of computing power which you did not have earlier
Yeah.
to do things much faster. What is going to be the impact of it? Yes, there is going to be impact in terms of not needing as much human resource as we did earlier. And that will spread across all levels, be it like from an app development perspective. If I were to go through the entire process that you talked about earlier, yes, it will do away with some design resources. It will do away with some product managers. It will do away with some software developers, because whatever you are doing repetitively can be reproduced through an AI resource at a fraction
Mhm.
of a cost. And any business will
Right.
want to optimize for it. But where does its limitation come in? Its limitation comes in with whatever is not repetitive. The moment you have to create something new, because how the AI models work so far, at least, is that it learns based on whatever evidence it sees. So if you don't have an evidence of something, or something doesn't exist, it can't create something afresh.
Right.
It will
Right.
do based on things that are existing in the world. A very good
Yeah.
example I came across very recently, and I think I also heard it on some other podcast. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who was talking about it. He said, I might be wrong on this, so please feel free to fact check. But yeah, he was talking about the fact that if you were to ask a generative AI model today to create an image of various wristwatches with different times on their faces, something like a 4 p.m. 20 minutes, or 5:10 or 9:30. The image will come up, but all will be with the hands at 10 and 10, like 10 10 time. Why?
Mm.
Because traditionally watches have been photographed with that V shape in the needles in the watch faces, because that's how the watches look great. So all advertising or all brands related things, they tend to
That's how it's.
photograph images. When it scours the internet for images of photograph as a benchmark, that's what it gets. So it won't be able to show you different time on an analog watch. It'll only show you 10. It's fine of
Right.
whatever you're asking it. So that's where the limitation comes in. So that's where the human factor still remains until, of course, who knows how technology develops. But in the current scenario, I think coming back to the primary question of where it comes in, uh, so anything that I can automate or I was not wanting to do because it was repetitive, it was something that uh, I had prior examples of. So you can optimize a lot of these things. You can
Yeah.
automate a lot of your reports. That is how we are using it today. And then, of course, we are also trying to figure out where all else, what we can improve with respect to our AI capabilities today.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Rajat, that was great talking to you. We are almost at the end of our podcast, and thanks for all your valuable insights. Any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with our audience before we conclude? Maybe some sort of good PM resources that you use that you would like to recommend to all the PMs out there who are managing some sort of consumer applications or especially fintech application.
So nothing specific to fintech applications per se, I think, but from a general improvement on PM related things, there are a couple of platforms that I tend to rely on. One is called PM Exercises, and I think it's called Product Management Exercises in whole. But if you Google it, you'll reach the same place. It's run by this guy called Bijan, and wonderful platform. I think I find it very helpful. Uh, and they have real world interview questions, and more than actually preparing for interviews, I think it gives you an insight into what the real world flow of solving a problem of a product strategy kind of problem should be like. Because when we are in our day to day, we are pressed for time, we tend to overlook a lot of steps which ideally we should follow. So, when you practice some of those questions, it gives you an insight into what the actual flow should be like, which we tend to often forget. And it's good to bring that back into practice. Very specifically speaking, like if you were to look at something like the consulting world, they have very set frameworks of solving things. And when you first get into the consulting frameworks of thought, it's very annoying that, oh, why am I having to do these things intuitively? I know that this is how it should be done, but it's very important to go through those frameworks because it helps you not miss anything. And the same thing applies for product management as well. So it's good to know those frameworks. And that's why I rely on that platform a little bit. Similarly, Rocket Blocks is another platform which I find very effective. They have very good resources of how to solve problems, how to solve product strategy related issues, which are more macroscopic, because it's very tempting to get into, again, going back to the same frameworks issue. It's very tempting to directly jump into solutions that this is how I'll solve it, and not consider other factors. So these resources I find really helpful. The next platform that I tend to use is Medium. I find articles in Medium to be very helpful. Some are really well written. Some, of course, are not that great, but most articles are really well written. So that, and similarly, Ken is a very good platform. I love listening to the 2x2 podcast as well. Uh, Amazing insights you get about the way people do things.
Great. Lovely hearing you, Rajat. And with that, we come to the last section of this podcast.
Okay.
Basically, it's a rapid fire round.
Okay.
Are you ready? So, if you're starting a career in product management today, what is the one thing that you would do differently?
If I was starting my career, I think one thing that we have been traditionally taught, which I find to be really incorrect and then very nonsensical, is don't go after money, chase good work. Please chase money. It's very important for your happiness. And don't chase money, it will follow you automatically. These are things that rich people will tell you to keep you poor. But it's very important to start chasing it as early as possible.
Yeah. The next question is first app that you check when you wake up.
Gmail, first app.
Okay. Dark mode or light mode? What do you prefer?
Dark mode. It saves battery and it's just generally cooler.
Okay, one common onboarding mistake that a lot of apps still make.
I think a lot of us try to get you in as quickly as possible. We don't ask you as many preferences, which might help tailor your experience, and then that becomes a big pain point for us to later solve. So, getting you in as quickly as possible, and that's the big
Yeah,
mistake.
got it. What do you think is the most overlooked metric in mobile app optimization?
Um, App size, I think. It dictates how quickly your app will respond, what kind of experience you will have as a user, and a lot of people I think tend to overlook it.
Got it. One thing that you feel AI will replace in the next 3 years.
And I'm still currently trying to figure out what should be my next challenge, which I want to be engaged with. These 10 years, so I don't have a clear answer for it. But I think, yeah, a lot
Okay,
of us PMs would be replaced, a lot of designers would be, a lot of developers would be. Whatever can be automated. General turn of industry.
all right. So, if not a product manager, what other profession would you have chosen?
I think I would be into acting and theater. That's something that really, that's something really calls out to me. I love public speaking. I love being on the stage, generally.
That's good. That's good. A dream or a goal you want to achieve in the next 3 years?
Um, I want to be able to play tennis well. I'm an absolute beginner right now, and I think I want to be able to play tennis well. That's one thing I would love to learn in the next 3 years.
All right. Thank you, Rajat. And that's a wrap on our podcast.